Hello, greetings from the BC Designer team. In this tutorial, we'll discuss how to use Bowtie diagram in strategic planning. So the Bowtie diagram comes to us from risk management domain and is used to identify risks, to analyze the risk, to analyze the controls that we use for the risk. And it would be a good idea to merge this idea into the strategic planning domain. And that's what we're going to do during this video. And to illustrate some of the ideas, I will use the demo account of XYZ Echo Group. If you want, you can go to sign up page, click demo account and access all the scorecards I'm working with. Or if you prefer, you can sign up with your own account and give a try to all these ideas. So here is the account of XYZ Eco Group. In the different videos we discussed what all these scorecards, what all these different scorecards work for, and let's look into one of these strategy scorecards that I used to describe the strategy of this group, specifically this one, Urban Greening Strategy Scorecard, that explains how this company implements the strategy in practice. And here we have some goals with some metrics and initiatives. If we prefer, we can visualize it on this map. And one of the goals within the internal perspective is effective green space system. And in the context of this goal, we have identified a risk, which is called supply chain volatility. So what this risk is about? We can give a short description here. We can quantify its probability or impact, and in most of the cases it might be enough, but in some cases we need to have a more specific, more detailed analysis of the risk. In this case I see on the context tab that this risk relates to a more detailed analysis, Bowtie analysis. So I'm going to click on it and open the Bowtie analysis for this specific risk. So what it is in our ecosystem, first of all. In our ecosystem, it's a separate scorecard, which is located, in this case, it's located here. And inside this scorecard, we have these items: the risk event, the threats, the consequences, and inside of each threat we have certain risk controls for the threat. But let's start with the visual representation of this Bowtie diagram. So in the center we have a risk event, which is in this case is trade policy shifts and supply chain volatility. And these rectangles on the left are the threats or uncertainties that we deal with that affect this risk. And on the right, we have the consequences. So the left part are the threats and the right part are the consequences. Now, what are these gray and green lines below the this rectangle, these threats, in this case, and the consequences? These are the controls or barriers that we use to prevent this threat and to mitigate the consequences of this risk. So, for example, we have here sudden increase in tariffs, and we have certain controls that allow us to manage to manage this threat. And we can also see that some of the controls are gray and some of the controls are green. If you was using our platform for other purposes, you know that the gray stands for lagging indicator and the green stands for leading indicator. I can actually double click and I have the staff training hours selected, and on the context tab I see that it is leading, and these two I see that they are lagging indicators. So this type of indicators is used to reflect the cause and effect logic in the context of this threat. So something that we do, something that is related to the success factor, like in this case staff training hours on policy, is the leading indicator. Yeah. So we trained our employees to work on certain policy. Yeah, that's leading indicator. But we also need to make sure that this training had an effect. Yeah, and how can we make sure that there was an effect of this training? We implement certain lagging indicators, lagging controls, or barriers, if you want to use the term from risk management. In this case, time to respond to policy and percentage of materials sourced from high risk trade zones. Yeah, so that's a bundle that we use to quantify this threat. And also some of the risk barriers here, actually the barrier that we use for reputational damage, to manage reputational damage. Here we have some initiatives. So risk response program. What is an initiative in this case? It's a more detailed explanation of how this control is working, our action plan, and we can click on it to see the more detailed description. So what's the benefit of using this approach, and what's the benefit of implementing it in strategic planning? Well, first of all, we have a quite clear picture of the risk, and we understand what this risk is about. We understand its threats related to this risk. We understand the consequences related to this risk. And we also quantify this risk. So we have certain leading and lagging indicators, the indicator that we can use within our scorecards if we want. We can also use this analysis within other areas of strategic planning. So for example, here I have one of the controls is reputational damage. One of the consequences is reputational damage, and one of the controls that we use is basically its quantification, is response time to stakeholders. So I can double click on it to see it here. And on the context tab, I see that this control is used on some other scorecard. In this case, a smart technology integration scorecard. So we can just navigate there and see how it's used. Yeah, and it's different scorecard describing different part of the strategy of eco group. And I see that in the context of effective incident response, we have this risk control that is taken from this Bowtie analysis. Yeah, so this risk control is using the data that we identified here, and it is linked to this objective. Yeah, so whatever I do here for this risk event, whatever data I update for this risk control, it will be reflected here. So in this way, we can actually connect different parts of our strategy with this analysis of the risk. So we can make the risk more contextual. That's one of the benefit of the risk analysis. Another benefit of risk analysis. Let's look again at these threats and consequences. So as you can see, the platform calculated for us the progress here and the progress here. So what this progress is about? This progress shows how these controls, the controls within these consequences in this case and threats in this case, how these controls are performing. So basically, with some reasonable assumptions, we can say that this part, the threats, is related to quantifying risk probability. And this part is related to quantifying risk impact. And it opens a lot of possibilities for us. On the level of calculations, for example, we can do what we normally do with the performance measurement systems with the scorecards. We can assign, for example, different weights to these consequences, and the platform will help us to manage it. Yeah. And another thing that we can do, and to do this we actually get back to this risk, the initial identification of the risk. I will open it. I will show you the formula. That is basically the multiplication of likelihood and impact, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But we can do one thing. We can power the likelihood, like I do here, with the threats. Threats indicators that is coming from analysis of this risk event. So basically with this part. You see here we have June. The performance is 55%, and here in June it's repeating this data. And we'll power the impact, again checking it out, with the consequences, yeah, that we have here. So if the Bowtie analysis allows it, if the business logic behind this analysis allows it, basically we can use the performance of the controls within the threats category to quantify likelihood of the risk, and use the performance of the controls from the consequences category to quantify the impact of this risk. And basically in this case we did it. Yeah. So along the changes of the performance of the controls here, yeah, we'll see this risk is moving across this diagram. So actually I can just pick random dates, and we see this risk is moving. Yeah. See this risk on this diagram is moving. So that's another benefit of how we can better integrate risk in strategic planning. And obviously we can work more here on this Bowtie diagram. We can visualize certain controls on a specific dashboard. And we can also add something new to this diagram. So to finalize this video, let's add a new thread here so that you know the direction you can follow to add a new risk. Okay, so I think I have prepared one of the threads I want to add. So the new thread will be currency fluctuations, and that's our thread. And the threat mitigation control, which will be percent of suppliers agreements with the dynamic price adjustment. So that's the logic. One of the threats is currency fluctuations. We can actually change its icon to be more relevant for currency fluctuation. And we quantify it by percentage of supplier agreements with dynamic price adjustment. Basically, so that agreement that allows us to adjust pricing, to negotiate pricing with partners depending on the currency fluctuations. I can set it up by giving it measurement units. I can set a target, which will be probably 100%, and probably current state will be 30%. The number of agreements with this requirement inside. And now what we can do, we can add this new thread here. To do this, I will need to click this button and put it here. So one of the new threads, and linking it here visually so that we know how it's contributing to the overall risk. So that's how you can use Bowtie analysis in BC Designer. It's really powerful for understanding all the risks. It's really powerful for mapping the threats, the consequences, and also mapping, most important, mapping the controls that we employ to mitigate this risk event. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to get back to us and contact our team.